This happened a couple of winters ago. I had just come out of one of the worst years of my life. I lost my job in a messy downsizing that blindsided most of my department, and about a month later, my fiancé called off our engagement. No warning, just gone. I needed to get away from everything, my apartment, my city, my memories. My old friend Liam had been pushing me to take a break for months. He said I was starting to look like someone who hadn't slept in years. I don't know what finally made me listen to him, but I did. He told me about this cabin up in Vermont, right near Lake Champlain. It belonged to his uncle, who was out of the country for the season. Liam said it was quiet, surrounded by woods with no neighbors for miles. He offered to come with me for a few days just to help me reset. So I said yes. The drive up there was long and mostly uneventful. Gray skies, soft flurries of snow, winding mountain roads. Vermont in the winter is beautiful, but it has this strange kind of emptiness to it. You feel like you're driving into a place that forgot time existed. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, it was exactly how Liam had described it. Small but solid old wood and stone, nestled between pine trees that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The lake was just beyond the tree line, frozen over, completely still. The kind of silence you don't notice until you stop talking. We stepped out of the car and I remember saying out loud, "This is perfect." But even then something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just off. Like the air was holding its breath. Liam unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The cabin was cold but cozy in that old New England way. Thick rugs, a stone fireplace, some faded paintings of fishing scenes, no Wi-Fi, barely a cell signal, and honestly that was part of the appeal. I was ready for a reset, for quiet, for space to breathe. That first night we made a fire, opened a couple of beers and sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the logs. It was the first time in months that my chest didn't feel like it was full of broken glass. I told myself I was going to sleep better than I had in a long, long time. And I did, but it would be the last peaceful night I'd have in that place. The next morning, the sky was still a dull gray, and light snow had started to fall again. It was quiet, eerily quiet, the kind of silence where even the wind sounds like it's holding back. Liam was still asleep, so I stepped outside for a bit. The cold hit immediately, sharp and biting, but something caught my eye before I could even take a full breath. There was a small package sitting on the front steps. I was certain it hadn't been there the night before. It wasn't snow-covered, and there were no tracks leading up to the porch, which didn't make any sense. The snow was fresh, powdery. Any movement would have left a mark. The package was wrapped in brown paper, old and a little damp around the edges. No name, no return address, just a small handwritten note taped to the top. It read, "Don't forget the light. It gets cold and dark here." I turned it over in my hands and opened it. Inside was a small bundle of old candles, thin, white, and slightly bent, and a box of wooden matches. The matches looked antique, not the kind you'd pick up at a gas station. The box had some sort of faded symbol printed on it, something circular, almost like a sunburst or maybe a compass. I couldn't tell. At first, I figured it was just some quirky welcome from the property owner, maybe something his uncle left behind. But Liam didn't recognize it either when he got up. He laughed it off and said something like, "Probably just some local charm. Vermonters are weird." Still, something about it felt off. Not threatening, just out of place. We checked the rest of the cabin that afternoon. There was firewood already stacked by the fireplace, old pots and pans in the kitchen, a few blankets in the bedroom. No signs that anyone had been there recently, but also no signs of anything wrong. By evening, the snow had picked up. It wasn't a full-on storm, but it was enough to cover the roads and muffle everything. We stayed in, made coffee, played a few card games by the fire. I tried not to think about the package. Before heading to bed, I placed the candles and matches in a drawer near the kitchen. No reason, really. I just didn't like the idea of them sitting out in the open. Liam crashed early. I stayed up a little longer, watching the snow fall outside the window. The lake was almost invisible now, just a flat white blur past the trees. I remember thinking, this place is peaceful, and I still believed that, until the third night. The second night passed without anything unusual. I slept deeply, better than I had in months. The cold air, the isolation, the silence, it was exactly what I needed. But on the third night, something changed. It started with the wind. Sometime past midnight, I woke up suddenly, Not from a nightmare or any noise inside the cabin. Just a feeling. The kind you get when something's not right, even if you can't explain why. I sat up and listened. At first, it was just the wind pushing against the windows, soft and rhythmic. But then I heard something else, a faint, pulsing hum, distant and low. It wasn't mechanical, not exactly. It sounded like something moving slowly across the frozen lake. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Liam. The cabin was dark, except for the glow of the dying fire. I walked over to the window and looked out into the night. At first, I didn't see anything, just snow. Then through the blur of falling flakes, I caught a shape, small, distant, and moving. It was out on the ice. I squinted. It was a person. Whoever it was, they were walking across the lake, alone. That didn't make sense. We were miles from the nearest main road. The snow had been falling steady all day. No one should have been out there. But this person kept walking, slowly, arms close to their body like they were freezing, and then they stopped, right in the middle of the lake. They turned toward the cabin. I couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette, faint but unmistakable. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they raised one arm and waved. Not a frantic help me wave, just a slow, steady wave, like they knew I was watching. I stepped back from the window. My heart started pounding, but I didn't know why. There was nothing threatening in what I saw, but something about it felt deeply wrong. I waited a few seconds, then looked again. The figure was still there, still facing the cabin, still waving. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. It felt like forever. Eventually, the figure lowered their arm and began to walk again, but not away, toward us, toward the cabin. That's when I shook Liam awake. His reaction was pretty much the same. Confused at first, then tense. He came to the window, took one look and whispered, "Who the hell is that?" We watched as the figure got closer, now more distinct through the falling snow. A woman. She wasn't wearing a hat and her hair looked frozen stiff. Her coat was oversized and she moved like she'd been out there for hours. And then we heard it, muffled shouting coming from outside. We couldn't make out the words, but it was panicked, desperate. Liam grabbed his coat. I told him to stay put. If someone needed help, we'd help, but not without knowing what we were walking into. I stepped onto the porch alone, the cold slicing through my clothes. The woman was at the edge of the lake now, just a few yards away. She called out again, louder this time. "I can't find my son. Please, he's out there somewhere." She was crying, hysterical. Every instinct told me to run back inside, but I didn't. Her voice carried through the cold air, barely above the sound of the wind, but frantic enough to cut right through me. "I can't find my son, please." He ran off into the storm. She stood just off the shoreline now, wrapped in a long, fur-lined coat, her breath billowing in thick clouds. From a distance, her face looked pale, more from the cold than anything else. Her hair was pulled into a tight braid, and there was something off about the way she stood, stiff, unnatural. I shouted back, asking where she had last seen him, but she didn't answer directly, just repeated the same thing. He ran off. "He's out there somewhere." Liam came to the door behind me and I told him to stay inside. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want both of us exposed if it turned out to be something bad. I threw on my boots and stepped out into the snow. The wind wasn't brutal, but it was enough to make my fingers go numb almost instantly. I trudged across the frozen ground, careful with every step. The lake was frozen solid, thick enough to walk on, but my nerves didn't care. She didn't move as I approached. Just stood there, arms folded tightly against her chest. When I got within a few feet, I stopped. "Where did you last see him?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, but she didn't speak right away. Then she said something that didn't sit right. "He always loved fire. Couldn't stop staring at it." I blinked. "What?" She tilted her head slightly. "Did you remember to bring the matches?" It took me a second to process what she said. "The matches. The ones in that strange package on the porch. The ones we never mentioned to anyone." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" I asked, taking a slow step back. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile you see in people who know something. You don't, something they shouldn't. Without warning, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver revolver. I froze. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Wallet, phone now," she said. I didn't argue. I handed both over with shaking hands. She never stopped smiling. Then just as suddenly she turned, walked back across the ice, and disappeared into the white curtain of falling snow. No panic, no rush, like she had all the time in the world. I stood there for a moment, stunned, until reality slammed back into me. I turned and ran. Slipping, stumbling, half falling, I made it back to the cabin and yelled for Liam to call the police. He was already on the phone when I burst through the door. Out of breath, heart punching through my ribs, I locked the door behind me and didn't leave that spot for the next 15 minutes. Every few seconds, I peeked through the front window, half expecting to see that same figure standing there again, but she was gone, and by the time the police arrived, so were her tracks. The officers showed up about 40 minutes later. By then, the snow had already wiped everything clean. There were no footprints, no sled tracks, not even a dent in the ice. Just smooth, untouched white, like she had never been there at all. Liam was pacing by the fire, still on edge. I could tell he felt useless for staying inside, but I didn't blame him. Neither of us had seen anything like that before. The police took my statement, asked the usual questions. What did she look like? Did I recognize her? Could I describe the weapon? I answered everything I could, though my brain was still foggy, and my hands hadn't stopped shaking. I kept bringing up the matches, the package. They looked at me like I was making too much of it. One of the officers, a younger guy, maybe early 30s, did ask where we got the key to the cabin. I told him it belonged to Liam's uncle. He nodded, scribbled something in his notebook, and didn't say much after that. Eventually, I asked them what they thought happened. Their answer didn't surprise me. Probably just a transient, or someone squatting nearby looking for a quick score. That didn't sit right with me. She didn't look like someone who lived in the woods. She didn't act like someone desperate. She was calm, controlled, like everything she did had been rehearsed. And then there was what she said. Did you remember to bring the matches? There's no way she could have known that unless she was the one who left them. But how? We didn't post about our trip. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere. What were the odds that someone just happened to leave a package for the exact guests who'd show up that day? It didn't feel random. The police checked the shoreline the next morning and found an old, partially frozen boat ramp on the far end of the lake. One of them guessed she came from there, said it would have been easy enough to sneak onto the property on foot even with the snow. They didn't find the snowmobile or the woman. That was pretty much the end of their investigation. They took a report, promised to keep an eye out, and left before noon. Liam and I just stood there, watching their car disappear down the tree-lined road. That afternoon, we packed up and left the cabin. We hadn't even made it halfway through the trip. The Airbnb host was surprisingly apologetic, refunded the whole thing without hesitation, claimed he had no idea what the package was, and insisted no one had been to the cabin since fall. He sounded sincere, but something about that didn't add up either. How would anyone know we were staying there? Why leave such a specific message? And why go to all that trouble? Just to rob someone of a wallet and phone? Unless that wasn't really the point. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Every now and then Liam would mutter something about how crazy it all was. How lucky we were that it didn't end worse, but most of the ride was just silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind that sticks to your skin like fog inside your lungs. I couldn't stop replaying the whole thing in my head. The way she stood out there on the ice. That smile. The way she said those words. Did you remember to bring the matches? It wasn't just a robbery. I know it wasn't. It felt like a performance. Like she had been waiting for us. Not someone like us. Us, specifically. But that's the part I still can't explain. I didn't tell many people about what happened, but I brought it up to Airbnb support, just to make sure they were aware. Their response was exactly what you'd expect. Polite, scripted, dismissive. We're sorry to hear about your experience. We'll be sure to look into the matter. That kind of thing. I asked them again if the host had any previous complaints, if there had been other incidents at the same property. They said no. And maybe that was true, but something kept eating at me. The host had been too calm on the phone, too quick to refund, too ready with explanations. He said he had no idea about the package, but who else could have known we were staying there? The listing wasn't public. Liam said he booked it through a direct link shared by his uncle. So who was she? A drifter with perfect timing? A thief with a flair for theatrics? or something else entirely. It sounds crazy, I know that. But there were moments, brief, subtle moments that made me wonder if someone set this up from the beginning. And I mean someone closer to me. I hate even thinking it. But there was a small part of me that kept coming back to my ex. She knew I was spiraling. She knew I wanted to disappear. And she had always been the type to hold a grudge long after it made sense. It sounds paranoid. Probably is. But after everything that happened, I started going back through old texts, emails. I looked for anything that hinted someone knew more than they should have. I didn't find anything obvious. But I also couldn't shake the feeling, like I had been watched. Not just at the cabin, but before that. Like someone had been waiting for the right moment to catch me off guard, to scare me, or maybe worse. That thought alone kept me up for weeks. It's been over a year since that night on the lake, and I still don't have answers. I've gone over every detail more times than I can count. The voice, the smile, the question about the matches, the way she vanished into the snow like she had never existed. I've tried to let it go, convince myself it was just a desperate thief, or some sick prank that went too far, but it never sits right. Not just because of what she did, but because of how she did it. Whoever she wasn't out there looking for random targets. She knew too much. She planned it. I started locking my doors religiously after that. I check my back seat every time I get in the car. I stopped posting where I am, who I'm with, or what I'm doing. I don't even like using my real name online anymore. People say paranoia fades with time. Mine didn't. The worst part is, none of it ever led to anything. No arrests, no reports, no follow-ups, just a case file collecting dust in a tiny police station in Vermont. I've checked the news more times than I should, waiting to see if it happened to someone else. Another break-in, another woman on the ice, but nothing ever comes up. It's like she was never real to anyone but me. Liam won't talk about it anymore. He says we're lucky it didn't end worse and that I should stop digging. Maybe he's right. But sometimes I catch him staring off, quiet, disconnected. Like part of him is still out there on that lake too. There's one last thing I never told anyone, not even Liam. About a week after we got back home, I found something in my mailbox. No envelope, just a small folded note. It said, "The light kept you safe." That was it. No name, no return address, just that sentence. I burned it in the kitchen sink. But even now, I still wonder if throwing away that note was a mistake. Because if she knew where we were once, maybe she knows again. Maybe she never stopped watching. And sometimes late at night, when the wind howls just right outside my window, I swear I can hear footsteps in the snow.